When the news broke about the so-called European Super League over the weekend, I figured it was just going to be a rehashing of all the arguments and proposals that we heard in October with yet more posturing and threats. However, as Sunday evening wore on and into Monday morning, it became clear that there was more to this story this time around. According to the so-called Super League, who issued a statement directly to the press, rather than having any official website or social media platforms of their own, a bit like ISIS, 12 European teams have signed up to the new league, which is really more of a league and cup combo like the Champions League, including 6 Premier League teams. The plan is to have 3 further founding members, taking the total number of founding teams up to 15. Those teams would be guaranteed of a place in the so-called Super League, which would have no promotion or relegation, which is a factor that a lot of people are focused on. Since the so-called Super League is intended to replace the Champions League rather than domestic leagues, this probably slightly misses the point. The real complaint ought to be that the 15 founding members wouldn't have to qualify, as they currently have to, for the Champions League, based upon where they finish in their domestic top flights. It is a minor distinction, but a worthwhile one nonetheless. The plan is also for there to be 5 free spots available to non-founding members of the so-called Super League, who would have to qualify for the competition each season, though how they actually go about qualifying is as yet unclear, as far as I can tell. Given that it is 5 teams, perhaps they hoped that it would be the best placed non-founding member team from each of Europe's top 5 leagues each season. Who knows? Who cares? Not me. Actually, one point I will make though, very quickly, is that the 20-team so-called Super League format would see 2 leagues of 10 teams, each playing each other at home and away midweek, with the top 3 going through to the quarter-finals. Meanwhile, the 4th and 5th place sides would each enter into a 2-legged playoff for the other 2 quarter-final spots. The tournament would then function just like the knockout stages of the Champions League, with 2-legged knockout rounds building up to a single-leg final at a neutral venue. All told, that is 18 group games, plus a further 2 if you're in the playoffs, and then 5 more games, including the final, should a team progress all the way to the final. That means that the so-called Super League could add between 23 to 25 games to a team's schedule for the season, compared to the 13 fixtures that a team typically has to play in order to reach the final of the Champions League. These are proposals, might I add, from teams who have been complaining about fixture congestion seemingly uninterrupted, and I think perfectly legitimately, for more than a decade, and particularly over the last 18 months. So yeah, that's quite funny, but that's not the point of this video. As soon as the news broke, the world of football erupted into a furious rage. Gary Neville's rants were perhaps the most impassioned and went the most viral, but everyone was at it. Rio Ferdinand, I think, called it a war on football. Gary Neville called it a criminal act against football fans in this country. Mika Richards went one step further, stating that it would be worse than 9/11. And in a passionate rant, Jimmy Bullard declared that the whole affair was the most upsetting news that he has heard since he found out that his dealer had been locked up for 9 months and that his wife was leaving him and taking the kids. All in the same week. Needless to say, people weren't happy about the news, and the reactions were so vociferous that I only had to make 2 of those quotes up. YouTube was no exception, with angry video titles written all in caps wherever you looked. When I was asked whether I'd be making a video about it, I said I'd probably already missed the boat. Once you've watched 50 people angrily condemning something, who wants to hear a 51st person, who isn't Gary Neville, do it a couple of days later without even showing their angry face, since they haven't been able to get a haircut since December? Not many people, I suspect. There are many criticisms of the so-called Super League, pretty much all of which I think are valid. It is a blatant and obvious act of greed with a total disregard for the wishes of fans and supporters, in a decision, at least in this country, taken almost solely by billionaires with either tenuous or non-existent relationships to the clubs they own, other than the fact that they are among the small number of people on earth who have managed to hoard enough wealth to buy a major football team, which will cost you a pretty penny these days. The disconnect between fans and owners has been repeatedly re-emphasised throughout this whole episode, and the gap between the two has never been more pronounced. I can understand why this issue has really brought that point into focus, but these owners didn't buy these clubs yesterday. Stan Kroenke has had a controlling interest in Arsenal since 2008, Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea in 2003, John Henry completed his takeover of Liverpool in 2010, the Glazer family have owned Manchester United virtually outright since 2005, the United Arab Emirates acquired Manchester City in 2008, meanwhile Daniel Levy has been Tottenham chairman since 2001, with Joe Lewis gradually increasing his ownership of the club throughout the 2000s. Among the entire lot, Tottenham are the only team majority owned by someone who was actually born in England. And even then, Daniel Levy, who is only a minority shareholder in the club, is the only man who still lives in England, since Joe Lewis relocated to the Bahamas for tax purposes a number of decades ago, and just occasionally swans into London on his super yacht. It may be a coping mechanism for some supporters of so-called super clubs to try and deny this, but the reality is that the people who own and run your football club don't care about you. They just don't. In all honesty, how many owners of these clubs do you think would willingly liquidate your club and see it go entirely out of business, leaving you with no team to support, a la Bury fans, if doing so meant that they would double their net worth in return? Hand on heart, I suspect every one of them would disband your club, set fire to the training ground, and sail off into the sunset on their billion-dollar yachts without a second's hesitation in those circumstances. These people did not grow up attending games with a parent or grandparent, or even watching games on TV. They didn't weep with you over missed penalties, or celebrate into the early hours following late winners and cup glories. They didn't stay up late into the night on transfer deadline day before they bought your club. Heck, most of them probably still don't now. They have no emotional attachment to historical local rivalries. They don't care if you're priced out of attending games, or even if you can no longer afford to watch your team on TV. They don't care. This is the reality of modern day football, and it didn't start or end with 12 teams signing up to a so-called European Super League. It didn't even start when they furloughed a load of minimum wage staff while still paying out millions to themselves in dividends. Or when Arsenal, owned by a man with a net worth in excess of $8 billion, passed on the costs of insurance on a flat block they own with cladding that doesn't meet the necessary fire safety standards to low-income residents. Or when the same club made the man who acted as their long-serving mascot Gunnosaurus redundant before spending over £100 million on players on transfer deadline day. Or Project Big Picture, or £50 football tickets. I could go on and on. Unfortunately, we have been drip-fed an increasingly sanitised and commercialised product in which a fan's worth is based solely on the revenue a club can generate out of them. As I've spoken about in the past on this channel, chief executives and directors of the top clubs, when speaking candidly, make no secret of their disdain or at least disinterest in loyal supporters. Why? Well, they're just less lucrative customers. A one-time visitor to Anfield or Old Trafford tends to be willing to pay over the odds for their ticket, they get to games nice and early, they buy merchandise, usually a drink, maybe also something to eat. A season ticket holder, well, they just buy their season ticket, maybe one shirt, and they'll often just go to a game for the 90 minutes that it's on for. They tend not to buy a new shirt, keyring or scarf every single time that they attend a game. If you offered John Henry or the Glazers a stadium full of tourists every week, even if they had no emotional attachment to the club, they would bite your hand off. Of that, I have no doubt. You can bet your bottom dollar that if or when some kind of breakaway so-called Super League does happen, the games won't just be played in Merseyside and Greater Manchester. No, it will be a travelling circus, just like these elite teams' pre-season tours. Beijing, Singapore, New York, Riyadh, Doha. Heck, is it even that unrealistic to think the games could be auctioned off to the highest bidder like they are in boxing? Hence why Anthony Joshua fought Andy Ruiz Jr. in Saudi Arabia. And there's talk of the mega fight between Joshua and Fury also going to the kingdom, where human rights are trampled but Eddie Hearn makes a quick buck and tells the world how a country in which you can still be put to death for witchcraft is modernising. Yes, modernising all the way into the 14th century, Eddie. Congratulations to Saudi Arabia. In fairness to Eddie, the regime doesn't take well to criticism. Just ask David Cameron's friend, Mohammed bin Salman, who ordered the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi and the dismembering of his corpse. Yeah, you know, the one who almost bought Newcastle United earlier this season. But no, The so-called Super League is definitely football's moral day nadir. The only way in which any so-called Super League really would be a nadir for modern day football would be the removal of any pretense of fair competition. I think this is probably what has got people up in arms more than anything else. Fair competition is something that is supposed to be sacred to sport. We all know it isn't, but it is supposed to be. That's why Lance Armstrong's doping scandal and Maradona's hand of God caused such lasting imprints in our minds. They are blatant examples of the rules that we think are established being broken. Of course, Armstrong wasn't the only cyclist who was cheating, they were all at it, and it seems unlikely that it stopped following those revelations. And whilst Maradona's handball was a blatant act of cheating, people tend not to talk about the repeated acts of violence and malicious tackles meted out to him by the England players and by just about every other team at that tournament up to that point, which are also absolute acts of cheating. However, this illusion that we have anything resembling free and fair competition is one that I wish to dispel, for it is just that, an illusion. Of course, we do still have promotion and relegation in English football and throughout the European game, but promotion and relegation have effectively already been removed for the richest clubs. During the Premier League era, Arsenal, Chelsea, Tottenham, Liverpool, Everton and Manchester United have never been relegated. The only one of the 6 breakaway so-called Super League teams that has been relegated from the Premier League is Manchester City, though obviously that preceded their takeover by another human rights abusing Middle Eastern Gulf state. Whilst it is possible for those teams to get relegated, in theory, the reality is quite different. Even a really rotten campaign for one of these 6 clubs tends to result in a top half finish. Anything below 6 constitutes a crisis. If you finish 11th, expect to lose your job if you haven't already. Right now, Arsenal are the black sheep of the so-called Big Six, all the way down in 9th place. They are 9 points off the top 4 at the time of recording, but 19 points above the bottom 3. These clubs have insulated themselves against the threat of relegation in all but official terms, which clearly still isn't enough for them. We like to pretend that West Ham potentially breaking into the top 6 this season or Leicester winning the title in 2016 somehow signifies that we have this wide open free-for-all of a league, despite all evidence pointing to the exact opposite. These are freak occurrences. Yes, they happen sometimes, and it is great for the clubs involved when they do. But without sustained, enormous investment, these success stories are fleeting. The correlation between where teams finish in the Premier League table and their total wage bills is blindingly obvious, but we don't like to look at it in these terms. Manchester United had several dismal seasons by their high standards following Alex Ferguson's retirement, but no one ever really thought they'd be relegated. The lowest they finished was 7th. They have still won 5 trophies during that time. Why? Because they have deep pockets, they kept buying players, and they have an enormous wage bill. Compare that to Leicester City, who, everyone would agree, have been remarkable over the last 5 or 6 years. They haven't finished above Manchester United since their title win. They haven't won a trophy since their title win either, and even this season, when they have once again punched above their weight, they will not finish above Manchester United. Why? Well, because they don't spend as much money. The only way that Leicester can hope to consistently disrupt the Premier League's established order and break into that top 6 season upon season upon season, rather than merely enjoying fleeting success like Southampton did during the mid-2010s, is by spending more money. I'm sorry to strip all of the romance out of football like that, but that is just the way it works. There may be free and fair competition on a match day. Each team has 11 players who lock horns and see who can emerge victorious. Over a season, upsets are rare, but still possible. Over a decade, forget it. For all the talk of disruption and unpredictability in the Premier League this season, the so-called Big Six are still all in the top 9 places in the Premier League table. Manchester City had basically won the league by Christmas, and the bottom 3 were all doomed long before a COVID-19 vaccine had even been approved. This isn't a festival of free and fair competition where anyone can win anything. The Football League pyramid isn't a place in which a team can go from the foot of League 2 to the top of the Premier League through hard work and determination. Only through cash. This is probably the 3rd time I've talked about this issue on this channel, and I regret the fact that it remains the case. But it isn't changing anytime soon. When the so-called Super League began gathering momentum last October, I made a somewhat contrarian video entitled Why a European Super League Would Be Great for Football. Now, naturally, that video was slated and downvoted mercilessly by people who looked at the title and decided that I must be some elitist corporate pig with shares in JP Morgan without actually watching the video. My argument was always that football is already broken. The game is already rigged to such an extent, to me at least, that free and fair competition has already been destroyed in any meaningful sense. And the current people and institutions within the game that hold power frankly do not seem capable, nor motivated, to fix any of these systemic issues. The Glazers and John Henry are not going to wake up in the morning and suddenly start caring about football fans, the sanctity of the game, or Olympic ideals. These are, at least as far as football is concerned, bad people. Therefore, they are going to do bad things that will hurt the sport. Whether it is a so-called Super League or something else, change for the worse is inevitable. The so-called Super League has to be put in the context of what it is. Grumbles from the owners of these super clubs surrounding the Champions League because they want to maximise revenue from the competition. UEFA has already succumbed to the whims of these billionaires, proposing major reform to the competition to appease them. It's just that they're not content with what they've been offered and they want total control. So maybe you'll get a so-called Super League, or maybe you'll just get further alteration to the Champions League, with zero consideration of fans and absolute consideration for the revenue of the continent's richest clubs. And it won't stop there, just as it didn't stop with the Premier League or alterations to TV deals, the list goes on and on. That is why I am supremely relaxed about the prospect of a so-called Super League, which I hope and firmly believe would actually collapse with time. Supporters hate it, I don't think it would be a thrilling spectacle, and I suspect it could lead to an increase in support for clubs outside of the 12 or 15 founding members that want to go in that direction. By that logic, I would rather see this whole thing go up in a ball of flames in one fell swoop and have a dramatic collapse than have the bit-by-bit destruction of the game that we've witnessed over the last 25 years continue, as the game has become less competitive, much more expensive for fans, and I don't think it is nostalgic to suggest that it has become less entertaining, even if the quality of football, and certainly of the players' fitness, has improved. So, I would rather football fans be the frog that is thrown into the boiling pan of water that is the so-called Super League, judges it for what it is, and jumps straight out, prompting more serious inquiry over the state of the game and further reform, than fans be like the frog in cold water that doesn't realise as the game is gradually ruined until it is dead. For the record, the boiling frog analogy is a myth. If you put a frog in cold water and heat it up, the frog just jumps out once it gets too warm. Frogs aren't nearly as stupid as we have been led to believe. But the myth of the boiling frog works better for my analogy, so you'll just have to pretend that it's right in this instance. Right, I had loads of other points jotted down in my notebook, but this video is already quite long and Jose Mourinho was sacked midway through me writing it, so I am in severe danger of losing track of the news. I suspect this story will rumble on for a little while, so maybe there'll be another video about it on this channel at some stage. For what it's worth, my gut feeling is that I can't see it happening just yet. It would create such an enormous rift given the fierce opposition from virtually every governing body within the sport, plus the fact that it has been rejected by German and French clubs, the two most powerful countries within the EU, which I think is significant. But we shall see. If you took away nothing else from this video, at least you now know that if you put a frog in cold water and heat it up, it will just jump out. Actually, I will end by stealing a joke from the comedian Alistair Green, who tweeted yesterday that it was sad to hear about this Super League business, but hope we can all put it behind us and all come together to enjoy the entirely unproblematic World Cup in Qatar. I think that hits the nail on the head. Of course, the so-called Super League is terrible, but football has been in a deep malaise for a long time now, and it's about time we dealt with these issues that go far deeper than the weekend's announcements. Thank you all as ever for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. You can also find me on either Twitter or Instagram, or both, by the username @HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.